In this video, I'm going to show how I can use a coding window. Simply by a shortcut in Panoply opens this separate window, which allows me to write code within a browser in a very sophisticated environment, and it can talk back to the original environment. I use it extensively, but it's also a really good environment for teaching JavaScript. So just to show a little bit of what it does, these boxes, first of all, I'm going to expand this one to fill the whole browser window. I can run it, and it will do stuff. Here it added some commands up here. There's a show and a remove command. I can run those. They will show this little box, which is what the example does. It's not a particularly useful thing, but it does some stuff. Here you notice I click on it, and it will say the color that I click on. It will change the background color to the color of these. These colors come from this JSON tab here, where I can edit the JSON. I can change that to be different things in here and run it again, and it will show a different box with the different colors. And I'm using HTML, CSS. I'm using this CSS here that it's drawing from, this HTML, and this code. Now, if there's an error in the code, let's say I do something like this and run it, it's going to tell me, it's going to flash red and show me syntax error, and it's even going to show me the line number right here in the environment. I don't have to jump out to the Chrome DevTools. And it can also do let's say I have a runtime error, something like x equals y. That would probably complain that y is not defined. So it can handle both runtime and syntax errors, does the right thing. It can even do those in the, here's where I add a command. This is the command show that you saw up here in the corner. And again, bar x equals y, let's try and run that. It runs correctly the first time, but when I run the command, it's going to give me the y is not defined error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to a simple example and build it up just to show how this is all put together, both using the coding environment tools and some of the libraries that it uses very effectively. They're libraries I use in my actual production code, but I can use them in this environment, and it's an extremely powerful environment for, as I said, for hacking my app, for developing new features before I move them into regular JavaScript, CSS, etc. files, and for teaching, it's extremely powerful as well. And I want to bring users into the development of Panoply additions, etc. And this is going to be very powerful for users. So it does a lot of things. So here I've simplified things considerably, less code here, and this code is only going to draw from the JSON file where I have an array of color definitions. And there's only this code. When I click run, this creates two user interface widgets as well as adding one command. And when I run the command, all it does is print out what it's getting from these UI widgets. And it's printing out the stuff from the JSON tab there. Now you'll notice that I actually have the ability to print things out in different ways. Here it actually tells me that that's an array of length 17, its name is colors, and it does it in a compact format where they're all put on one line. Up here you can see a less compact format for the position up here from this box. Here you will notice that's actually displayed as an array, even though it came out of this text widget, and that just happens here in the code. And of course you notice the command up here. So let's see how that's put together. We create a form by calling generic input form. That is what creates these guys here, and we pass in two objects, one called font, one called position, and it gives a description of what they are. Here's the samples it gives. It gives the tooltip. That means that when I mouse over it, it's going to show what I want it to show. Obviously that's optional. It has a default value, and it tells that it's type string. Both of these are type string. Both of them have examples or samples, and both of them have tips. And what I do here, I have a function within the environment. It's just called getYellowBox. That gets a reference to this box up here. And I set its inner HTML to be empty. That just clears out whatever was there before. And I append the form element to that box. That puts the form there. Then I add a command here saying add command. And I pass a function that is called when that command runs. Within that, I call the log function. That log function simply dumps something over here into this output window or output box. And here I log the font by saying form get values. Here's the form, I just get its values. And the font's value is Arial at this point, so it will print that out. And here I do something a little bit more complex. I get the X and Y position, which I've done in this box here. I've done it comma separated. I just chose to put it into one box here. And here I do some basic JavaScript, split it on the comma, map it, parse int, so I get an array of actual integer values. And I also give it a name, and that's why it displays position right here. And finally, I get the text from the JSON tab. That's this tab up here. I get it as text. I parse it as JSON. It doesn't know it's JSON. It's just, these are all simply providers of text, these tabs. And I want to print it out saying it's colors, and I want to say print it in compact format and print it in with verbose, where I tell it the type and all that, have these little delimiters. There's just a few features like that that make it convenient. And that's all there is to it, to be able to get information from a UI, to add commands, to use the logger, and to get information out of these tabs. So that's a significant bulk of what this coding environment does. Now here I've simplified it in a different way. The code is very short, just 2 lines. All I do is pull the HTML from the HTML tab and the CSS from the CSS tab and apply the CSS. I say get CSS and apply it to the document. And then I put that HTML into our yellow box here. And this creates a little color box. It doesn't do anything. If I click on it, it doesn't do anything. And it simply exists within that yellow box. And there's nothing dynamic about it, and no, I can't change settings other than going directly into the HTML. You see the HTML here is a little bit bulkier because I do it for each item. Here's, for instance, this right here defines that first little color box item, and here's the overall box. Of course, I can change the let's say I change it to be at 300 px, and if I run this, it's going to change it to be at a different dimension. That was the top coordinate of it. Let's put that back to 30, and but not much else going on here. You can see one of these I do in a different font, just to test that. Style font family Georgia. The other ones don't have a font specified here. They're just using the one from the CSS. But that's all there is to it. Get text, just like I did get text JSON, I can get from the CSS, I can get from the HTML, and I can use it within the environment. So here we're going to bump the sophistication up a notch. When we run it this time, we have the user interface widgets you've seen before, at least some of them. We have the show box command, no remove box, but show box. And when I run it, we get our little box. But notice here it's drawn from the JSON. It prints out the HTML for each one of these color box items. For instance, this one right here is one of these up here. The difference, though, is that we have So you can see we have this user interface. We can pick a different font. We can choose the position. So I could put it 0, 0, 0, or I can put it at, I have to run it again each time because it's drawn in the yellow box and it overwrites these things, but let's put it down here. And so, as I've said, it's drawing from the JSON, but it's also using HTML here, which is templatized. You will see in here, it's not bulky HTML. It's for each one of these color box items, it only has it once, where we have a color box item defined right here, and we have variables in there. These little hash is where we insert the color. I insert color in there twice. And we have the font gets inserted. We have the top and the left coordinates are inserted dynamically as well. And we have both the color box defined by these HTML comments is everything within here, and then the color box item is within here. And this has two things. It has color box item and it has contents. Contents is relative to the parent color box, and you'll see how we put this together with our template system. So again, we have our form elements that get written when we run this into the yellow box. They get appended. Now in the showbox command, we're going to draw from these. Let's pick Papyrus font and 2250, and it will insert that into the yellow box. We pull out the values. Form data get values I just stored in a variable so I can reference those later. Form data position, I split it into an array of strings. I don't need to parse those as integers since we're going to just use them as strings. I get the colors into this. Colors will be an array after I've parsed the text of colors. Here's where it gets interesting. I get the text from the HTML. As you've seen, this is valid HTML, but it uses comments and various other things to define variables within it or sections within it. And we pass that to the template tools function load. Template tools is a library that's included by default within this coding environment. It's a library that's very powerful, and you can use it outside of this environment too. I'm going to talk more about that later, but for right now, let me just show how it works. After I load these templates, they go into a variable called templates. This is just an object that now has functions that you can call to display that creates strings of HTML. And looking back here, let's look at a color box item. You notice that color box item is this section here. We have color as a variable within it and font as a variable within it. And that happens right here. Templates actually gets a function created dynamically when we load it called color box item, and you pass it an object that has color and font with which you pass it the string for the color from the array and the font. Notice we're doing this in a loop, and we're appending to this HTML string. Starts out empty, but it gets the string all these color box items. We log those to the box. That's why you see it here. And then we do the box HTML. The outer box here we call templates color box. Again, this comes from the HTML because we've defined it color box. TT color box means we're defining that. This is the start of it. This is the end of it. It's got a slash to show it's the end of it. Everything in between is what we call color box, and we look at the variables top and left. And I think those are the only variables within it. These are variables within the color box item. Or I'm sorry, there is contents is another variable. Contents is done differently. Contents is defined here. That's this whole section is to be replaced, is considered a variable. So I don't have to use the ## symbol. I just use it combined with the color box item definition comments. It's a very simple format, or a simple format for defining this within valid HTML. Here I simply call the function color box. That returns the box HTML. Since I've passed in the inner items HTML, that's the one we created up here as the contents, then we say get yellow box inner HTML equals box HTML. Of course, that wiped out our previous things that were in the yellow box, which is our UI. And then we log the HTML down here too. And that's it. But the important thing is to see how those template tools library builds this as strings, and then you can just insert that in, and it creates this box. Notice the box is not dynamic. We'll get to that in the next step, because the template tools does have some tricks up its sleeve that I want to show for making things more dynamic. So finally, we're going to bring it all together and show all the features where I showed you before. We can create our little box here. We can give it any font. We can also do something, I don't think I may have forgotten to show this the first time around. I can open it in the, let's put it at 2020. Here it is in the opener window. This is the Panoply window. So I can interact back with the Panoply window. I can do stuff there, and that's one of the real powerful things about this environment, is that I can interact with the original window, as I typically do when I'm developing Panoply features in this coding environment. So I can remove that. Let's show it again here at, let's get it a little bit out of the way, and let's show how this works. What's new here is the ability to click on these elements, and of course the ability to remove it. When we click on the elements, we have put an on-click behavior onto each one of these, the little title box. And it passes the color in, and it also logs it out here, as well as setting the background color. So the way that works, and this is really one of the most interesting things about the template tools library, is that within here, within the HTML, this looks like the HTML I showed before, with one exception, is that I've put these little attributes. Typically, element attributes are supposed to be data dash something, but it's data TT for template tools, outer, and data TT title. I can do as many of these as I want, but that means I'm interested in that element. When that element is created by string, it's created as a string, but it's going to come back to me as a DOM reference, an actual variable that points to that element, so that I can say put an on-click on it, or put a or remove that element, or assign its background color. And in this case, I also, you'll notice up here, I got rid of the top. I had top and left as variables. I got rid of left. Why? Because I'm going to assign the left variable dynamically, just to show that I can. It's a different way of doing it that sometimes is more appropriate than doing it as a string replacement, just depending on what I'm doing. So I've defined data TT outer and data TT title. And I just want to be able to get to them in the code at the appropriate time. And where that happens, there's a few things that have changed here, but one of the things you'll notice is that all the template things are built into one big statement. So after I get the templates into T, variable T, I say T color box. And here to assign its contents, instead of having done a for loop and saved it into a temporary variable, I call the map function. That's just a regular JavaScript function that calls it on each element of the array. And we create a new array, this time a string array, because I return the color box item string. And then I join them up with the join function and return, and that goes into contents, which expects a string of HTML. We also do the top down here as I did before, but of course it's missing the left. We don't do the left at this point. But what's the other thing that's happening here is I'm not assigning this to inner HTML of the yellow box. Now I'm assigning it to the I'm using this template tools function. It's an HTML function that appends to element content. So I take that string of HTML and I append it to document body. Technically, it's not the document body. It's either the document or the opener document. That would be the panoply document, depending on the value of this form data use opener window. So I append it to that. I don't wipe out the rest of the contents of that, and that's pretty convenient that I have a string that I'm able to use HTML strings in that way, as I have several functions that do that. But what it also does is it looks for those little data TTs. As it's creating these elements, it's going to pull those out and get a reference to that element when we turn it into a DOM element, and it's going to call a callback. Here's the callback. It calls on the title elements, or on the color box items here. Each one of them, it calls this little function, and it passes an object called elms. I call it elms here, and it's elms.title is that little sub-element within it. And I can do that to as many as I wanted, but in this case it's just elms title, and I can set its onClick. And there I set its onClick function. Within the onClick, I have to reference the color box item, that's the outer one, and I get that down here in the callback for color box. Color box callback, it has, since this one, you'll notice outer will apply to the parent containing template, while this one title, the parent containing template, is the color box item. So it just calls that callback with our elements. We get them here. In this case, we save the color box to a global variable. The reason for that is if we run this again, we want it to be able to work so that it wipes out the old one when it creates a new one, or so that you can still remove it even if we've wiped out the local variables. So we do use a global variable, which we wouldn't do in production code, but here it makes sense. And we set the font family from the font up here. We don't do that in the using the template. We just do it directly on that element, and we set the left position here. Because we have a reference to the element. You can do it either way, like I do the top position with pos1 and the left position. It doesn't matter. You can choose which one works best for you. But the ability to have this hybrid thing where I'm doing some things with templates and strings and some things with DOM references is extremely powerful, and it eliminates the need to use element IDs and various selectors that really get messy. They get messy in a sense, global variable sense. This allows you to just get at the element when you need it, when it's created. You don't have to have these things that pollute your document namespace with all these IDs and such that could conflict if you don't take a lot of measures to say if you wanted to add 2 of these color boxes. They're not going to conflict because their IDs clash into one another. So it's a powerful technique. I use it more. I have another video where I show these the template tools, how I build a more sophisticated thing. I just do a really quick overview of it, and you can look at the code if you want. But that's it for this demo of this environment. Thanks for watching.